Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today, the man himself on his own podcast, the governor, the man of Beckerville, USA, Mr. Michael Becker.
Hey, Paul. It's been a while.
Well, thank you for being on your own podcast. We appreciate that.
Yeah, Hawaii was calling, so I had to be away for a while.
How was Hawaii? Was that fun?
It was nice. Yeah, it was nice getting out of the Texas heat for a few days. I decided early on in my career I didn't want to be in Texas in July, so I did my best to avoid as much of it as possible.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. The family had a good time?
Yeah, everything was great. So I would highly recommend buying a bunch of apartments so you can afford to get the hell out of Texas in the summer.
In fact, you just closed on another apartment building while you were on vacation.
Yeah, got another one coming too. So it's been a busy time.
You are on fire. So as you know, Michael Becker, the governor of Beckerville, USA, he owns so much real estate that they should pick him up every day because he pays so much in property taxes to the state and to all the lovely counties that he has properties in.
Helping all the children go to school. Yes.
I'm glad you were able to make it back in. Also sitting in the podcast today with us is John Brixon. John, how are you?
Hi, Paul. Doing well.
John, as you know, is also with Old Capital. He's a loan officer, very knowledgeable. And you've been with Old Capital for how long, John?
About a year and a half now.
So he has done a great job. He has a history of banking, and you want to talk with John if you have an opportunity that you need financing in an apartment building. So I want to talk a little bit about the Old Capital Conference. We're excited about that because we are announcing who our speaker is, our keynote speaker this year is going to be. As you remember, last year at AT&T Stadium, we had Roger Staubach as our guest speaker. He did a great job and kind of talked a little bit about what was going on in real estate and talked a little bit about how he did and the fun he had as being a Dallas Cowboys Hall of Fame quarterback. The year before, we had Rob O'Neill, who, as you remember, shot and killed Osama bin Laden. So he talked a little bit about teamwork and how we only buy these properties with teammates. And so how did you get in the middle of Pakistan? With teammates. And so great theme on that. So this year, our overall theme is really a complicated one because we want to make sure that we have operational efficiency on our properties. So it's really taking care of business. And so at the House of Blues, October 24th and 25th, we invite you to come down and see our keynote speaker this year is Lou Holtz. And his theme he's going to talk about is do the right thing. And whether it is to your limited partners or it's to the bank or to the property, we want you to do the right thing. So we look forward to seeing you at the House of Blues to listen to Lou Holtz. Again, it's an all-day event. Any way that you can come down to Texas, we would love to see you. So go to the oldcapitalpodcast.com, oldcapitalpodcast.com to push a button and reserve your tickets to come down and see us. So we're excited about that. What do you think about that, Michael?
I think the prices are going to go up, so you should go now. And it's a good event, so we should have 600 to 700 of our closest friends join us out there.
This will be the cheapest ticket that you can get at this period of time.
Yeah, so what I always like to say is this is not a business you can do behind your computer or sitting at home. Got to get out, got to get network. People do business people they know, like, and trust, so they don't get the opportunity to meet you, like or know you unless you buy a ticket, get on a plane, come and get networked. So it's not only other deal sponsors as passive investors, as well as pretty much every prominent brokerage shop in the Texas region will be out there, have a representative there. So if you want to get to know and network with a large group of apartment brokers, that's a good place to go.
Absolutely. So we appreciate you coming down and see us down October 24th, 25th. So in the podcast today, we have a friend of ours that we've known for a while that I think that we want you to listen to because I think he calls himself a nerd somehow, some way. He's a high technology guy that has been in real estate for a number of years, and he's kind of a thought leader in this space of using technology to get, like we said, operational efficiency with your apartment building. So in the podcast today, we have our friend Neil Bawa. Neil, how are you?
I am doing really, really well, and I'm thrilled to be on here because, I've been listening to you guys for a while, and, I followed Michael Becker's career. So to be here on this podcast is a thrill.
Well, I'm glad you were able to make it down. We sent the Old Capitol jet for him out of San Francisco.
That's right.
Southwest bus, right?
It was the paper plane.
That's right. You and your 125 other friends on the Southwest just coming down to Dallas. So thanks for coming into the podcast today. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about operational efficiency. And then you came down here for a conference. There was a mastermind conference, and they had about 35 or 40 syndicators that you guys all came to one room, talked a little bit about what was going on, and kind of started us off is, what would say, the top 4 or 5 different things that people are talking about today that would help other apartment owners, syndicators out. What were some of the things that you learned or that you thought were pretty good ideas?
Yeah. So firstly, I love masterminds because, we present at conferences, but at conferences, a vast majority of the folks that are there are maybe, haven't bought any properties, or maybe they've bought one and they're mostly passive. And masterminds are a very different field, right? So you've got a fairly small number of people in a room. And as far as I know, everybody really has to be an active syndicator, and the vast majority are full-time, and the vast majority have staff. So we really talk about things in a completely different way. And also the sort of stuff that I would be hesitant in sharing before 500 people at the conference when I speak today, I'm okay with doing that in a room with 20 or 30 people, because I also know that way they will share back things that are of great value to me. So I really, really enjoy Mastermind, and this one was actually particularly interesting. So talking about operational efficiencies, I think the big message was that we all are paying either, you can call it price to perfection in today's market, or slight overpayment, whatever, take your pick. So more and more of this group is realizing that we need to focus more on asset management than ever. So the message from the group was everyone in the group is either hiring asset managers or beefing up their existing asset management staff to put more focus into how can I squeeze, more juice out of that same orange. And there was more and more talk about, what are some of the things that we are doing that are successful to get that money out. So there was talk about all the different pieces of asset management, and there was talk about retention, right? So people were saying, well, a typical property, maybe we retain 50 or 55% of the people. And we know that when we get that from 55% annual retention to 65, the churn difference, the difference in vacancy and my maintenance cost is huge. And today, if I want to hit my numbers, I really have to focus on that. So rather than just talking with my property manager about it, I'm going to start tracking that whole process. I'm going to see how I'm doing it. And I tell people about how I am managing retention with my army in the Philippines, actually making phone calls out of the Philippines to retain people. And other people were explaining their strategies, and they were doing some cool things where they were telling their property manager that you've got a benchmark 90-day out, and they were even tying back spiffs to the tenants, right? So $50 spiff at this level and $100 and $250 at this level, because people are realizing that I almost need to be perfect with my property to hit pro forma today. And so if I can give something away that's very small and get my retention into the 60s or the high 60s, it makes an enormous difference to my NOI. So what I'm really encouraged by is that every syndicator is realizing that there needs to be a significant focus on every aspect of asset management. So it was thrilling to see that, because in the past, there's been too much of a focus on acquisition.
Yep, that's right.
And now people are beginning to realize that all of that acquisition stuff doesn't matter if we're nowhere near pro forma.
Let's talk a little bit about having a team in the Philippines. Let's do a little bit of a turnout of that. Tell me a little bit about what that is and how that is effective for you.
So Michael Blank specifically asked me to teach a section. So I taught for about an hour about my team in the Philippines. And so the short answer is it's an outsourced team that essentially looks at every aspect of our business, including equity raising, finding investors, but their biggest focus is really on how do we improve net operating income at our properties? How do we get more NOI, right? And so we've looked at every idea that we can come up with, and we've now started to implement them one at a time. So the first thing that we did many years ago was we said, we find that if we can create more tenant leads at our property, right? We find that those properties tend to have, number one, a higher occupancy level, higher than the market. So let's say the market's at, that submarket's at 93, we can get to 95. We can even get to 96 in that market by generating more lead flow. And the other thing that we noticed was that the property managers were actually getting better at selecting tenants that might stay longer within the bounds of the fair housing laws. And so we started to create lead flow. And creation of lead flow is a very hard process because the property managers are already doing it. They're already using AppFolio or Yardi, and those have their own, lead systems. But we were able to add to that by doing things that a property manager wouldn't do, right? For example, they're posting to Craigslist every 2 days. We're posting to Craigslist every 2 hours with this team in the Philippines. And because Craigslist ads are only visible for about 2 hours, and then you're on the 7th page where nobody will ever see you, if you could create 48 different Craigslist accounts and post every 2 hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you're going to get way more tenant leads, right? And so we started doing that. And last year, we generated 23,000 more tenant leads than our property managers had. These are leads that are coming directly from us, and we track every one of them. And we signed 821 leases off of leads that we generated. So we've essentially become more than an asset manager. We've become a property management enhancement.
So how do you find outsourcing people like in the Philippines, and what's their cost?
So I've used a lot of different engines like onlinejobs.ph, and I've used Upwork. I find that the best tool to use is unquestionably upwork.com.
Yep.
Now it's getting more expensive. So we've had some years where our basic account was free and they were charging a fee to the virtual assistants. They're not changing that, but I find it's worthwhile. I do not hire part-timers because what I find is that trying to save pennies on the part-time means that they're distracted, they're working with others. So we only work with full-time people. They work 9 hours a day or 10, their choice. They work 5 days a week, and they work the property's hours. So if they're working on my property in Fort Worth, they work that property's time zone. If they're working on a Pacific Air property, then they're working that particular time zone, but they're working U.S. hours only, no flex hours at all, right? They're working their nighttime. And typically, my base payroll cost is roughly $5.50 an hour for them. So I'm basically spending somewhere around $12,000 a year on salary. And then I'm spending about $3,000 a year on technology, their Dropbox, their Ring Central, all of those sorts of things. And then I'm also spending time on project management supervision because my project managers are part-timers that are based in the US. And those US-based project managers are managing these teams in the Philippines that are full-time. And so we're paying about $120,000 a year right now on Upwork, and it is insanely productive.
Talk about insanely productive. I mean, I think you had said to me before we got on the microphones about them calling in Utah for covered parking. Tell me a little bit about that story because I think it's pretty good.
One of the things that I like to say that most people don't like is I think property managers are underpaid. And in my mind, you're giving a property manager 3% of your property, and he's got this big list of all the things that he's supposed to do that he gives you when he signs the contract. And here's what I've found. No property manager that I've ever worked with, even the best ones, does all of those things because within the bounds of the 3% that they get, if they did all of those things, they could never break even.
Sure.
So what they do is they try and optimize as best as they can. And, they train their staff. So somebody comes into the office to pay a check and they say, hey, would you like a covered parking spot? So they're doing their best, right? And some of them are not even doing that. So what's happening is that ancillary services at your property, which directly go to NOI, to your bottom line, are really not being sold as well as they can. And those include washer-dryer combos. They include covered parking and a whole variety of services like that. Pet fee collection, right? Late fees collection. I think that they're doing a best effort job. And the amount of money that can be gathered if it was far more than a best ever job is huge. It is enormous, and it comes without any cost except for the team in the Philippines. And so what we've done is we've observed our property managers in the first 6 months, and we try and catalog the things that they do really well. And on those things, we do nothing except pat them on the back. We tell them you're doing an awesome job. On the things that they consistently don't do well, even though they're overall a great property manager, we eventually go to them and say, we would like to run a pilot where we actually do this activity like selling covered parking. And we'd like to do it through our team in the Philippines. Please note, it's very important that you understand, we are not trying to cut your fees. We have no interest in ever trimming your fees. we are trying to just get a little bit more optimization. We'll stay out of your way. We're going to make sure that, nothing goes wrong, and we take responsibility for that. So, for example, properties in Utah. So Utah gets very cold and very hot. And so what we found was that it actually doesn't make any sense to just call a tenant and say, would you like a covered parking spot for $35? So we only do it. So we have a team in the Philippines. This person, their name is Alvin. And so what Alvin does is he checks the properties to see if it's snowing right now in Utah or if it's over 100 degrees. And both of those happen, several times a year. And so only if it happens does he go into AppFolio. He pulls a list of everybody that is a paying tenant right now that is not behind on rent and does not have a covered parking spot, and he makes a phone call out to them, right? And imagine the efficiency of doing that when it's 105 degrees outside.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's freezing, right? And you've got, a foot of snow and you really want that covered parking spot. So by basically applying technology and also then applying some optimizations to that, we've gone from properties that had, maybe 50% of their covered parking spots filled to 100%. And, I'm very quickly going to tell you what that really means for my investors, right? So if you have $35 a spot, and you're selling 20 extra spots, right? Because you're making these phone calls, that's $700 a month. That's $7,400 a year. Over 5 years, you've now made $36,000 for your investors. But as long as you're doing it in that fifth year when you're selling, that's $7,400. And Utah, I'm selling at 5 cap.
Yep.
That's 20 times $7,400.
Sure.
So now I'm basically making 150 additional on sale because the incoming guy assumes that all of those parking spots are still going to be taken, simply because the last 12 months they were. He's looking at the T12, and the T12 consistently shows the parking lot is full. So he's making that assumption, right? And I'm giving my investors 150 on sale and $35K in gross. That's $185,000. What am I spending over 5 years on that? Less than $5,000.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it makes sense because little swings in performance have big swings in value, and you spend a little bit of effort, and you can optimize your revenue. That's a good point. I think that's overlooked a lot. It's not just so much how much ongoing revenue you do; it's really just the ultimate disposition on the back end for sure.
And chasing dogs who should be paying pet rent that are not paying pet rent.
Yeah, that's another one of ours. So we have a property. I'm not going to say publicly which one it is. So a lot of people are installing high definition cameras at properties because they're fairly cheap, right? You can go to Costco and get a box of these 32 cameras, and they come with a DVR, and people are pointing them at, basically they're pointing them at the parking lots because they want to make sure cars don't get broken into. So I encourage you to try something different. So at one of these properties, we turned the cameras about 20 degrees so that we could actually see the stairways. We can see people actually walking up the staircases all the way to their properties, and we install them both inside and outside. So the nice thing about a 4K camera is that it only costs us roughly $2,000 more for the whole kit to go 4K instead of go full HD, right? But the camera is so sharp that if it's installed at the end of a hallway that's 200 feet long, we can still identify people's faces if their unit is at the end of that hallway. Right? So we can identify which unit they're going into because we have a 2D map of the property in the Philippines. And so we can tell which unit he's going to, unit 124. And what are we looking for? Well, we're simply looking for people that have dogs or cats. And so because these are motion capture cameras, you can get through a very, very large amount of footage very, very quickly. And so when we see a person that doesn't have a dog or cat, we just ignore that. But if they do have a dog or cat, we use the cameras essentially to follow them up the staircases and into the hallway, right? And we see them walk back to their unit, and we're like, okay, let's look at the 2D map. Oh, this is unit 124. And then we basically log into AppFolio and see if there's a pet rent for unit 124. And if there isn't, guess what we do? We take a screen capture, a blurry cam capture of that person entering the unit with their pet, okay? And we send it to the property manager along with the unit number.
Sure.
And the property manager has a conversation with them. And now the next day, we're getting $30 of pet rent. And so we have one property where we had 21 tenants. So last time we did the audit, we had 21 pets that were unpaid. And so now we had 21 into 30. That's $630 a month. That's $7,000 a year. Once again, same math, $35,000 in 5 years in pet rents. And basically that's, $7,000. We're getting a 16x or 17x when we're selling because we're selling that property basically at under 6 cap. And so that's another $150,000 or $200,000 that we're making. And once again, there's no cost associated with this other than that team in the Philippines. What am I paying for this? Honestly, over 5 years, not even $2,000. It's a very quick process to identify these people. The property manager gets trained on it. He receives an incoming email with a blurring cam picture and a unit number. He knows that he picks up the phone. And anybody who denies it is sent the blurry cam, right? So they can see themselves.
That's pretty cool. What other takeaways did you have from this event? I know we were talking about trying to reduce turnover and kind of increase retention. One of the things that the guy shared was that we're trying to push a few more of our properties, especially the ones that we're looking to have a little bit longer tenure of ownership. Try to get a few more 15-month leases, kind of reduce the availability as they come up. Any other things that you took away from the mastermind the other day?
So there were a number of people there trying out various strategies for reputation management, right? So some of them are actually paying companies to do reputation management because there's a growing awareness that the reputation of your property, the number of stars you have on Yelp and Google reviews and apartments.com is very directly tied to your retention rate. And if we are not going to be able to push rents as much as we could in the future, let's push retention rates, because that always drops to the NOI, right? Somebody who leaves every, let's say, 18 months, you've now got to rehab that unit every 18 months, and there's a significant vacancy cost plus, manpower cost and efficiency cost to that. But if on average your tenants lived 22 months or 23 months compared to 18, you can do modeling on that in Excel. We're all great with Excel modeling, right? Performas. You do that modeling and you see the number difference, and it actually even surprises people like us that have been doing it for a while. It's like, wow, that's a crazy amount of money. So the only thing I'm doing is really doing my reputation management, and that's pushing up my property, maybe 4 or 5 months in tenancy state. And so I am seeing, and there were many people in that room that have arrived at this conclusion that reputation management is totally worth it. And so some people are doing outsourcing. Of course, as you can imagine, I'm using the Army in the Philippines to do it. But a whole bunch of them were basically paying third-party companies and really saying, you know what, I've got to get my reviews up, right? And then also I need to have recent good reviews. So some of them are incentivizing leasing agents to go out there and say, look, you got to get a good review every month. That's part of your job now. And then some of them, so there was this very interesting conversation about, so what is a good rating, right? And so the consensus came out that once you get past 3.5 stars out of 5, there's no point in pushing it further. And in fact, somebody says that a property that has a 4.5 star rating looks shady, right? Like everybody's like, these people are stuffing reviews. So we'll stop at 3.5, because you're not looking for more people to come to your property because of reviews. You're trying to prevent them from looking at the reviews when they're Googling it to use, Google Maps to come to your property and seeing a 1.5 star, because then they start reading the horrible reviews and then never show up for the actual appointment. That's what you're trying to prevent. So the goal is most properties that we take over, especially the C's, tend to start around 1.5 stars. The B's tend to start around 2.5 stars. And so the goal is, to try and push them up to 3.5 stars. My methodology, which I disclose, and a couple of other people were doing very similar things, is, so we go into AppFolio or Yardi, whatever it is, and we look at the most recent maintenance trouble tickets. And so what we do is we look at a ticket that was closed today. And so we call that tenant. We say, hey, we're calling from the property management office. We're actually calling from the Philippines. And we say, we noticed that the trouble ticket was closed. How did it go? We just want to check to make sure that, you liked it. And they say, yeah, things are okay. My faucet is fixed. And so we say, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give us on this maintenance, visit? Would you give us a 9 or an 8 or a 10? So if they give us a 9 or a 10, then we ask another question. If they give us like a 7 or a 6, then we send the maintenance person back saying, you probably didn't clean up right? Because why would anybody give you on fixing a faucet a score lower than a 9 if they weren't actually unhappy, right? So because what's the point, right? So if there's a lower score, then we send people back by creating a ticket in AppFolio. And sometimes that annoys our maintenance staff, but it also tells our maintenance staff that we're checking up on them, right? So it has a side benefit. But the main benefit is that if he says 9 or 10, then we ask another question, which is, what would you say is your overall level of satisfaction with our property, right? Obviously, if he gives us a low score, not a 9 or a 10, then we need to have a conversation with our property manager about why this person's dissatisfied. And sometimes they tell you why they're dissatisfied, noise or, whatever. But if they give you a 10, then here's what we say to them. We say, Okay, that's great. We're really, delighted that you're happy with the property. In about 5 minutes, we're going to send you a text message and it's going to have a link. If you have 5 minutes, could you possibly tap on that link and write us a review? And the way that we do it is in the Q1 of the year, the link is going to Yelp. In Q2, it goes to Google reviews. In Q3, it goes to apartments.com. And in Q4, it goes to some other website. I can't remember what. And so now what we're doing is we're ethically stuffing reviews from people that we've just had a conversation with, right? Sure. And because most of these review sites are now more and more sensitive to geo-targeting or reviews, you can't stuff them anyway. Like I can't write reviews from the Philippines because Yelp is going to flag it right away. But Yelp knows that this person actually lives at this property because of the IP address that the review is coming from. And so as long as you can space this out over a year, you're now getting legitimate reviews that are talking about the property. When you stuff reviews, you can't make up things about the property because you don't know. But the person that lives there gives you context-sensitive reviews about the property and why they like that property. And that feel is important because it raises our show rate. And when the show rate goes up, right, from appointments to shows, that means more applications. That means our property manager can pick better tenants. And that means both a higher occupancy and a higher quality of tenants. So that was a big deal about reputation management and how it really can make a huge difference to your net operating income.
Anything else at that mastermind that maybe
one of the things that kind of jumped out at me, maybe you talk a little bit about too, was the process of kind of raising capital and maybe some of the most common mistakes a lot of these guys are doing from the standpoint of there's been a big push. A lot of these guys are kind of starting out to pay other people for kind of raising capital for them, essentially kind of pay for performance, which is in direct violation of the law, essentially. And, they're not really even knowing that they're violating the law. They're just kind of going out there and saying, hey, I got to raise $2 million and, Neil, come along. If you could raise $500,000, I'll pay you this percentage. You raise $1 million, I'll pay you more dollars. And that's a direct kind of context. So it seemed like a lot of the people there were a little taken aback by that, kind of seemingly to me. So I don't know if you had any sort of comments around that. We've kind of transitioned here over the last several years to only doing 506Cs and trying to focus on that to kind of just take the general risk profile down. And I know you kind of echoed some of my comments, but I don't know if you have anything to share around that.
Yeah, this is one that I actually like to talk about on some of the podcasts. One of the things that I like to say that people bashed me for is that I don't think multifamily is in a bubble. I think multifamily syndication is now in a bubble. And that bubble is tied back to the fact that people who are fiduciaries of our money, our passive investors' monies, appear to be behaving like children. I have received an email from an unnamed superstar syndicator that appears to have been sent in this. Instead of using BCC, he actually used CC. So I could see that the email was sent to hundreds of people. It clearly states that you can raise as little as $50,000 for me, and I will give you a prorated portion of the GP in the project, which, firstly, I was stunned that somebody would say this in an email. But the fact that this is happening where, instead of going to broker-dealers or whatever, you're just basically creating this army of people that are raising small amounts of money for you.
Non-licensed.
Completely non-licensed people, right? Not even non-licensed, they're non-trained. And then what's even worse is that this person was doing it on a 506B. And what's
the difference? Michael, can you kind of...
Yeah, so really the difference is when you could do a Reg D is the exemption that virtually everyone uses when they raise capital for real estate projects. There's two main subsections, 506B and 506C, and basically the difference is 506B, you can raise money from both accredited and sophisticated investors, meaning they're non-accredited, so they don't have a net worth over $1 million, so long as you have a pre-existing and substantive relationship and you document that through a questionnaire and you keep good records and all that stuff. Or you could do a 506C, which means you could take anybody, you can advertise so long as you take reasonable steps to verify that they're accredited. So what Neil's kind of alluding to here is that they were doing the 506B, where you have to have a pre-existing substantive relationship, the soliciting others to raise money for them. So that's a direct conflict of them actually having a pre-existing relationship, plus they're paying a non-licensed person.
And nobody's controlling what these people are posting on their Facebook. So now you have these 50 or 60 people. How can you possibly police all of their social media? Because for a 506B, even saying something as simple as, we've got a property that we're buying, and that property, we're looking for equity. These words are still illegal on a 506B. And how do you control that something much worse isn't being posted by these 50 people?
Michael, how does the SEC police that?
I haven't heard a whole ton about it, but, you got to think at some point, everyone's been kind of bailed out by the good deal defense here. So like everyone's just making money, so no one's complaining. But at some point when you pay a 4.5 cap for a piece of crap property in the hood and it goes bad, at some point that's going to happen when you don't get 6% rent growth every year. Someone's going to lose money with an experienced sponsor on one of their first few deals. And they're going to go knocking on the door of the SEC, and then all of a sudden they start looking into it, and then you start getting some trouble coming up. And that's kind of what I think at some point is going to happen, but I don't know if you have any.
I think the SEC is driven by complaints, and we are so far protected by the all ships rising effect. But keep in mind that when you post something publicly on Facebook, it is there forever. You almost can't remove it because it's also being posted to other people's feeds sometimes. And as a result, when that complaint happens 2 or 3 years from now, the SEC basically can, generally it's an investor who's unhappy. So now he's obviously going all out. Some of these investors really know that what is being done is incorrect. You only need one investor out of 50 that actually understands what you did is wrong. And now the deal's gone bad and he's after you, right? He wants blood. And so what I'm seeing in the industry is that more and more of the capital being raised is being raised in a non-compliant fashion. And I don't think that little guys that are doing one deal get in trouble. I think somebody who's doing capital raising at a very large scale using hundreds of other people to raise money is going to get into trouble. And until then, we will have this bubble continuing to develop.
It's like almost like a network marketing, like if you're selling soap through Amway, and that you want to have your neighbor participate, and you'll get a little piece of everything your neighbor buys.
Yeah, so I would just encourage anyone that's going to do that just to make sure you have a very thorough conversation with your securities lawyer. Make sure you understand what you can and what you can't do. But to pay other people to raise capital for you is illegal unless they're registered. Or the only way they can do it is if they are a co-sponsor with you, meaning that they're part of the management. They have actual duties besides raising capital. And you can't do it based off of performance. So you can take your split of if you have a 20% split or whatever it is as a sponsor, you can give them a percentage, but it can't be based off performance. That's my layman's understanding of it. But just make sure that you have a very detailed conversation with your securities lawyer and kind of use these as talking points. Got
it. Makes sense. Neil, go back and tell me again some of the things that you're seeing right now in the marketplace. I think we had gone back and forth in an email, I think last week, as early as last week, talking to one of my clients, talking about pro formas and not hitting pro formas these days.
Well, this is going to make me unpopular, but I believe in just saying what you believe in and sticking by it. So I've had several conversations with people. I happen to know 2 guys that are directors at large crowdfunding portals. I'm not going to name who it is. And both of these guys, my conversations have been around, hey guys, you have these massive rooms filled with underwriters, and they're looking at massive numbers of deals that are coming through, and you're rejecting most of these deals, right? So obviously the biggest reason you're rejecting them is, you don't think that they're going to hit pro forma. And he says, yep. So one of them said these specific words to me. He says, Neil, it is my belief that of the deals that are being sold in 2019, less than 15% will hit pro forma, and I'm being kind. And that stunned me, but It really shouldn't have, because I'm seeing what's happening in the industry where I can't even get into best and final anymore because I'm off by millions. I used to be off by hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that was a great strategy because, 1 out of 10 will bounce back to you, right? When somebody, doesn't get a loan. But now it's never going to bounce back to me because I'm off by millions of dollars. And so now that starts to make sense when these people are saying, we think that less than 15% of syndicated deals in 2019 will actually go on to hit pro forma.
Wow.
So are people overshooting on rent growth? Is it on expenses? I mean, did he get specific on where people are getting too aggressive on their pro formas?
I think one of the things that he mentioned was that they're really not factoring in the down years, right? So he says when you're doing a project, you have to assume that you're going to have some great years when your rent growth's 4%, 5%, and then you're going to have down years. And he says some of them are factoring in lower rent growth in some of the years, but they're not factoring in higher delinquency. So those same years where your rent growth is down or even below zero are also the years where your legal costs are higher, your delinquency is much higher, your concessions are much higher. And he's seeing no evidence of any of those in their numbers. And as a result, he basically thinks that they're not going to be able to influence NOI. And he was asking me, Neil, what are some of the things you're doing? So I started explaining my army in the Philippines, where I said, I'm just taking my fate in my own hands. Because one of the things that I'm saying to my investors is, I think everybody's overpaying. And they're like, what about you, Neil? Don't you have off-market deals? No. So you're overpaying? Yes, I'm overpaying. I think that at some point you just accept the fact that today to stay in, you have to overpay and move on to the next step, which is, okay, so you overpaid by 5 or 10%. What are you doing to add more value to the property to overcome the overpay? And I think that I've made that mental shift, and I don't think a lot of people have.
Yeah, I can say I think it's part of that through operations. Part of that could be through some of the capital strategy. So if you can be more efficient, or as I often say, it's a completely unfair business. So one of the things I was sharing is how some of the recent deals we've done. I was in my office one day, and Freddie Mac calls us up. The head of Texas wanted to meet with us because we had done a bunch of business with Fannie Mae, and if I could come in, and we just did a loan at a 156 spread over 30-day LIBOR, which is just, unbelievable.
I think my jaw hit the floor 3 times when I heard that. Yeah. So I mean, that obviously fixes the problem, right? Yeah. Michael's fixing it through incredible relationships that we don't have access to. And so he's able to make deals work. I'm also seeing this other trend of making deals work, which at face value appears to be legit, but has a problem, which is people are taking, as syndicators, smaller and smaller cuts, right? So, 70-30 doesn't work. Let's do 80-20. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's do 90-10. Let's do 95-5. And the investors are thinking, I'm making all the money. I'm making a killing. And I'm saying, this is horrible, because now you've got 4 people taking a 10% cut. Firstly, they cannot support staff. And so as they scale, nobody's going to be managing those properties. Yeah. But what's even worse is when the next recession hits, which is inevitable, these guys have to go back to their day jobs to meet their bills, because at that point, they're not going to be buying properties all day long. And when they do that, who is going to manage this property? Who is going to manage this asset, right? So to me, I think that what's happening is this concept of let's just cut our own fees to make numbers work is short-lived, because at the next recession, a whole bunch of these people simply are not going to be syndicators. They're going to stop.
A lot of these guys who 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago have been flipping single-family homes, they found some success at that, and they had a little bit of a pot to get into the multifamily business. And now they're multifamily syndicator superstars that are superstars after one deal, so to speak. So are you seeing some of these syndicator superstars that promise their limited partners an 18, 20% return? Are they able to keep those numbers up? And what's the indication?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think they can. I think that scaled organizations like Michael are planning for all the things they need to do to maintain those levels. I think everyone else is just simply assuming that they will hit the level simply because they hit it in the past. So the significant percentage of the industry appears to be relying on the past performance is indicative of future performance.
And that's where I'm going with that. They don't have a history behind them to see, just like the people in the crowdfunding. They're looking for ideas. And what John was asking, what are they doing? Are they looking to get higher in income on that side or lower expenses? Do they throw these things in where you may have to have concessions in the future if the economy starts to slow down? They don't put any of these triggering effects in the future on how they're going to run their organizations, because they just don't know.
And everything's IO for 5 years, and then no one thinks about what happens when
IO ends, right? Yeah. So it's just, I don't think that people can see that far out because they haven't been in it for long enough. And then one of the worst things that I'm hearing is you've got this one property superstar syndicator standing in a conference in front of 500 people and saying something that is utter rubbish, which is, we're buying Class C because it does better in a recession. Please don't say that to people, because other people are listening to you and repeating it to a bunch of investors. There is no statistical evidence that Class C has ever done better in a recession. Please show me a single recession. Forget 2008, but show me 1991 or 2001. And show me Class C doing better in a recession. I buy Class C. I like buy Class C. But I'm buying Class C because there are demographic shifts that support higher occupancy at Class C over the next decade. But I know I'm going to get hammered in a recession, right? So this nonsensical idea that Class C does better in a recession appears to have been perpetrated through a lot of conferences and podcasts. But it's just bullshit.
Yeah, and then everything's the same cap rate, right? So, I mean, whether you buy a Class A brand new infill development or a 1974 piece of crap deal in a questionable location, it's all a 5 cap. It's crazy.
Yeah, I see more and more of that. So recently I started pivoting to new construction. That's where I came from. I came from that world, and I'm going back. And a lot of people are like, Neil, new construction is expensive. Labor's hard to find. There's a trade war going on. Isn't it the worst time to be doing new construction? The answer is, firstly, if right now I'm buying a $20 million value add and overpaying by $2 million, I think that's a hole too big for me to get out of. I don't have Michael Becker's amazing, financing abilities. I don't want to get into a $2 million hole on day one. When I go and do a $20 million new construction project and I buy land for $3 million and it's 10% over, now I've dug myself a $300,000 hole. That's a smaller hole. I can get out of it. And people are like, well, yeah, but what about trade war and delays? Well, the short answer is this is about deal structuring, right? So instead of going to developers, what if I directly went to builders and said, I'll give you a GP cut in the deal, but the cut is dependent on the speed at which you build, right? And I need fixed cost bids, right? So I make actual fixed cost bids. And what I'm doing is basically I'm giving away a portion of my GP to protect the deal and protect the investors. And I know what's going to happen to that builder. He's doing 12 projects at the same time, but only one of them, he has an incredible benefit if he finishes 3 months early rather than 4 months late, right? And I know what he's going to do to his staff. He's going to move it. I know he can't do more than 5 or 6 of his 12 projects on time, but I know mine's going to be one of those 5, right? So I think you can manipulate the system. I think you can structure it so that it becomes less risky to do new development. Obviously, there are risks. My investors are well educated. I really do not like working with investors that are brand new. And I tell people, if you're brand new to my ecosystem as investors, a new construction project is not appropriate for you, right? Run a bunch of value adds, get some cash flow, and then we'll talk about a new construction 2 years down the line. And I think that I'm pivoting because I'm seeing all these things that Michael just talked about. I mean, people are paying 5 cap for a 1972 deal that I really don't think has the upside. And, well, why don't I build a cap at 7.2? Right? A brand new property that I have control over. And to me, the relative risk of new construction is actually decreasing compared to 1972 5 caps.
And you're building stuff in opportunity zones too.
I'm doing both. So the challenge, of course, is there's 8,700 opportunity zones. The vast majority are awful. They are ridiculously bad places that no one should build anything, not even storage or industrial, let alone multifamily. But what I found was about 3.5% of them are great. Once again, my army in the Philippines profiled all of them using sites like Industrial and Census Reporter. And we found 307 of them that were awesome, investment grade. And so we started basically making thousands of phone calls to we first figured out which cities they were in. Then we figured out the city websites. Then we basically figured out who the economic development officer was. And we're making phone calls to these EDOs. And some of them respond back and say, yep, we have projects. The first question is, does the city like it? No. Okay, we don't want to talk about that project. Is there any project that you have that the city likes, right? That we can talk to the builder on? Because we know that one of the big problems is cities sometimes allow projects to go ahead, even though they don't really want those projects to succeed. They don't want the project to happen. So they were just waiting for some procedural problem so they can basically halt the project. So we want to work with the ones where the city's saying, I really want this done. And I want it done in the next 12 months because I know what the cities do. They will do anything short of completely illegal to get that project pushed through. So now we're beginning to come back with projects like we have one in Provo where the city is gifting us a multi-million-dollar pedestrian bridge so that we can be a transportation-oriented development or TOD, which puts us in a different class and I don't have to build parking. So the city is making our project a TOD project because they want it built. I love those kinds of projects because they will find a way to get my project built, right? Because that's their initiative to have a mixed use housing in that particular block.
Yeah. So, well, I've heard you speak a few times. It's one of the things I thought was pretty interesting is kind of hearing you rattle off a few of the interesting websites and data stuff that you go to. So I don't know if you have as we kind of get close to wrapping up here, maybe a few tidbits of places where you go get data for different things that maybe the top 3 or 4 or 5 of them that you find extremely useful when you're looking and identifying prospective properties that you want to go out and acquire.
Absolutely. So Google itself is a great resource for population growth, right? So I see people buying 5 caps in markets that have declining populations. I think that's incredibly risky. So you need to have very, very significant population growth. So I tell people, try to stay as close to 1% annualized population growth as possible. Where do you find it? Google, right? So just type in population growth Columbus, Ohio, or population growth Dayton, Ohio, and you'll see the massive difference between Columbus, Ohio, population going up consistently, and Dayton, Ohio, population going down consistently. But I'm noticing the same exact property with the same vintage being sold at the same cap rate in both of those markets. And it makes no sense to me, right? So Google's great for population growth. But then if you want to get real estate specific numbers, the best website is city-data.com. So you go to city-data.com, type in Columbus, Ohio, and type in Dayton, Ohio. And in the first 6 inches, you're going to see home price increases. You're going to see, income increases. So I tell people you want to have about 1.25%, 1.5% increases in income, and you want home price increases to be more like 2.5% a year over the last 15 years. And CD Data gives you that information. It doesn't make sense to look at home price increases since 2011 because every city in the US would be above that. But what you want to see is what's happened to them since 2004. And so home price increase, income increase, and then lower down on that same CD Data page is a blue crime table. At the bottom line of that table, the number on the right should be below 500, and the number should be decreasing from left to right. What that means is the city was higher crime, and now the crime is consistently reducing. And if that number has reduced below 500, I believe that when you exit 10 years later, it will be lower cap than it is today because of all the data work that I've done. I found that there is the strongest correlation between consistent crime reduction and cap rate compression. So if crime continues to decline over a decade and a half, that city over time changes classes and institutional start to come in because they're tracking crime reduction. And so if crime's below 500 and maybe was 750, like Columbus, Ohio is at 414 today and was at 750, well, that's a very consistent decline. Well, we're beginning to see the classes change in Columbus. We're beginning to see more institutional capital come in. So if you look at those numbers and then combine that with the last one, I love this website. It's called departmentofnumbers.com. So DEPT of numbers.com. Yeah, funny name, right? departmentofnumbers.com/employment/metros. It'll give you every metro in the US, current numbers on employment rates. The last column is 12 months job growth. Sort by that. And you'll immediately see the worst cities and the best cities to invest in. Any city that is losing jobs with the nation at 3.8% unemployment, I tell you, the Almighty would have trouble hitting pro forma in that city, right? So on the other hand, there are cities in the US with 5% job growth. And, you can screw up everything that you're doing and still hit pro forma simply because that city has a true all ships rising effect, right? And I see cities like St. George in that list. I see, obviously, they're tertiary markets, and I tell people, rather than buying 5 caps in that are 1970s in core markets, start looking at some of these tertiaries, right? Especially if you're tracking that data month over month the way that I am doing. And if that job growth is consistent, then maybe, just maybe, this tertiary may be a good risk to take. And obviously, you have to convince your investors to go into a tertiary, but there's the same tertiaries show up again and again and again. Provo, Utah, St. George, Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Tucson. These are places that consistently have outrageous job growth. And so rent growth in these places is often 2 or 3 times what Dallas has.
Well, the rising tide and the strong demographics in some of these markets has certainly bailed out some people with less than perfect operations. Neil, your use of virtual assistants is incredibly impressive. I haven't ever met anybody who has increased their productivity like you have with virtual assistants. Where can people learn more about using virtual assistants and effectively working with virtual assistants?
Well, one of the ways to do that is my website, multifamilyu.com. Multifamilyu.com was designed as a pitch-free, true education portal. So you go there, there's 50 webinars a year. One that I am debuting in a few weeks is called How to Become an Omnipotent, I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it, Omnipotent Work God and 10x your real estate using virtual assistant armies. I use the word armies very specifically because if you are looking to use a virtual assistant, it is not going to make you that work god. What you need to understand is that this is an investment of time. Instead of hiring one awesome operations director in the US that costs you $120,000 a year, I am suggesting that you spend that $120,000 in the Philippines, get an army, and they will do incredible things for you. And I don't just suggest that you hire virtual assistants. I suggest how to manage them, how to find them, how to recruit them, and then how to give them tasks. Because that's one of the things. What am I going to have them do? My problem is the exact reverse. 5 years, 6 years after I started using virtual assistants, they are so overstressed that sometimes we have to give them days off because they're hyperventilating. The average virtual assistant that I have has over 100 open tasks in my project management software. So I know they're really stressed. They're very, very stressed. And I've hired 2 of them starting this next Monday, simply because my team is so overworked. And, the answer to what do I have them do is in some of these webinars on multifamilyu.com. So I think everyone should be using them. I think everyone in technology does. I mean, if you look at tech companies, it's always a 1/3, 2/3, sort of thing. It's just in real estate, we haven't woken up to the fact that there's this incredible resource that everyone should be using.
So you're going to call it the 10X. I'm going to graduate you to the 12X. You actually should be the 12X guy because, you call yourself a little bit of a technology nerd, but, if you can implement the technology into a labor-intensive business, which, that is what real estate and Class B and C property is, just like what you're doing, whether it's virtual assistants or just some of your different philosophies, I think you're going to be very successful. And some of the people that have listened to you in the past have been very successful with your help. So any last words before we say goodbye, Neil, of any inside information that people should know?
Well, I want to share 2 of my sayings. So I think one of them, 3 of them, one of them is slightly funny. This is the only saying I've ever coined. And the saying is that the Bible got it wrong by 1 letter. It is not the meek that shall inherit the earth. It is the geek. The richest people in the world are geeks. Bezos, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at all these guys, they're geeks. So now already the geek is inheriting the earth. And I have 2 sayings to get you to that point. So don't be afraid of being a nerd. Don't be afraid of being a geek because that's the way the world is going. And the way to get there to true geekdom is, number 1, accept the fact that if you cannot measure, you cannot manage. Whatever you don't set benchmarks for, baselines for, you cannot manage it. And then the second thing that you should accept is data beats the crap out of gut feeling every day of the week.
If somebody wanted to get more information about you, what is the best way for them to reach out and touch you?
So I'm very accessible. You can reach out to me on Facebook directly. I happen to be the only Neil Bawa, Neal Bawa, on the internet. So every Neil Bawa you're reaching out to happens to be me. You're probably going to hit a virtual assistant, but that's okay. They let you through. And the other way to reach out to me is multifamilyu.com. That's our portal where we do 50 plus webinars a year. We're very nitpicky about content in our webinars. So we believe we provide true content. And I think there's, at last count, 40 speakers that have presented on our platform. And if we think that somebody was pitchy, we make sure that they never present again on our platform. So podcasts are incredible, right? Because you can consume them in the car. But then if you want to go deeper into a subject, it's nice to have that webinar feel.
That's it. Michael?
And you're going to come out to the Old Capital Conference. Is that right?
Heck yeah.
All right. So if you want to meet Neil in person, just come out October 24th and 5th, and you get a ticket at oldcapitalpodcast.com.
Fantastic. John Brixton, thanks for coming along with the ride. We appreciate you being here today.
Yep. Thank you, Paul.
And Michael Becker, always great to see you in your own podcast.
Glad I was here for a change.
And Neil Bawa, boy, we appreciate you spending some time with us. We certainly learned a lot. And thanks for spending some time on a Saturday to hanging out with us here in the podcast.
Thank you, team. This was fun.
Again, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.